I'm sure you know Elizabeth Holmes. She wrote HRH, So Many Thoughts on Royal Style, and she's a journalist and a friend. So she is one of my experts on visual identity and on brand. And we talk about the excruciating strategy that the royals employ to think about what they're wearing for appearances. And whether it's a specific signature color or a certain shape, or you're always wearing that same accessory, or you always have the same haircut, that is how people become, how people come to know you. And it does affect their perception of you. Lynn Paolo is another expert. She's a customer from Scandal and Shameless and The West Wing and a million different shows. And in On Brand, we talk about how she created Olivia Pope's character on Scandal and the clothing choices she made to exude power and confidence. And she put her in a really thick heel. So when Olivia Pope walked into a room, she could like walk with strength and pride, as opposed to like a wobbly stiletto where you're like really being careful. So there's so much thought that can go into this. And it's honestly, I always say fashion is just a strategic weapon of choice to tell your personality to others.
I really love that. One of the things I remember back when we were going to more stuff in person or before COVID, when I was going to do my book launch, my book was the cover was red, and I was like picking up red suits, red dresses. Like my whole thing was I was going to create like a uniform of red. And so it's interesting you say that, because I really do. I thought, one, it was like kind of a confidence booster, but also like the power suit deserves the name, the power suit. That's all I have to say. Like you do feel like,
I agree. So, it's funny. So my book is, I don't hear it. It's like a gunmetal, like a bluish gunmetal metallic. I'm not going to walk around in gunmetal clothes all day long. Yeah. But so I didn't go with a color story for anything with the book, but when I'm going to be doing appearances, I actually am doing a pantsuit because it feels right. It feels like a pantsuit. And normally I'm a dress girl. So I don't know.
Yeah, see, I love it. I love your point about fashion as a strategic weapon. I think that's great, especially for brand. And I think it's one of the more fun parts of brand, depending on if you like the fashion piece or not. I think a natural question for people when they're thinking of their personal brand is going to be imposter syndrome, right? There's going to be the person who is nervous about bragging about themselves because they think everything was about luck, or I don't want to talk myself up too much. What if they ask me a question I don't know, or am I really good enough to be in this room with all these other people? So tips on overcoming imposter syndrome when it comes to personal branding. Let's hear them.
First of all, my favorite question to ask myself, and every single person should steal this, is why not me? Right? When I was setting out to do a podcast and every single production company said no, I could have easily been like, well, they're the experts, like maybe I shouldn't do it. And then I'm like, well, why not me?
Yeah.
I Googled how to do it, and Leave Your Mark podcast is now 3 years old, I think. So it starts with why not me. The second thing is, and I do say this in On Brand, if you're in the room, you deserve to be there. You need not question why you're in the room. The question really is, what do you do while you're in the room? And there's always going to be a moment where you're like, am I good enough to do this? Am I smart enough? But the thing is, if you're really pushing yourself, you actually haven't done the thing yet. So if you're feeling that fear, it's because you're about to embark on something that you haven't experienced yet, which actually is exciting. So if you replace the fear with excitement, you can actually rebrand your fear.
I love that. One thing that naturally comes up for me when we're talking about this is this external validation thing, right? So trying not to have your career be your identity and get the validation of your worth from, again, your resume, your accomplishments, your job title, whatever it is. Do you ever find that these things conflict, like trying to build the personal brand and with this notion of like, but also don't put all of your eggs in the basket of like, you are your career, your self-worth is only based on, again, like what room you get invited to, what your job title is, that kind of thing?
Yes. And I lived it, right? I mean, that is what happens when you spend almost 2 decades at one company. My name became Aliza from DKNY or DKNYPR Girl, right?
Yeah.
So in On Brand, I really want people to put as much equity into their own name as they do where they work. Because I understand the credibility of a company, the credibility, the status of a job title, it makes you feel secure.
Yeah.
But I think people should reframe it and realize what should make them feel secure is actually the experience they're accumulating, because the skills are yours no matter where you employ those skills, right? It doesn't matter what company you're at, you can still do that thing you do. So it's really one of the reasons why on my podcast, I never put company names in the titles of the episodes, because I really want each person's name to be enough on their own. It's, it's really easy to try to glob on to credibility from here or from there. But I think each and every person has a responsibility to say, you know what, I was born with this name. I'm going to make this name mean something. And we see people mess this up on LinkedIn, actually, when they're like Lauren M or Aliza L. It's like, well, why? Why are you not putting equity into building awareness for your name?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think you're right. I think it does bring you some security. And I think it's like, how can I quickly use some big brand to be like, here, look, here's a thing that validates I'm good enough to talk to or something. And part of that is also our society of asking people, what do you do? Right? The second question we ask you is what's your name? What do you do? Right? And it feels like we're automatically profiling you, whether you're good enough to have this conversation with at the cocktail party or if we should move along. So, but that's a whole nother podcast for another day. I do want to wrap up by asking you to give us some examples of, maybe 3 people who are doing personal branding really well. And I would love it if you could name an entrepreneur, someone who's working for an organization, and maybe someone who is, I'm going to use air quotes, not working. And I just mean not working in the traditional sense. So maybe a working mom, because now everybody's working. So, or they've always been working, but you know what I mean.
So somebody who is an entrepreneur, Kara Golden, who is the founder of Hint, I think does an exceptional job on her personal brand. She is multi-channel, multi-medium. She is supporting other women. She is conveying thought leadership, advice, empathy. So definitely her. Katie Welsh, who is the Chief Marketing Officer of Rare Beauty. She is someone who is obviously in charge. She's a major professional, but she's also very personable on social media. She's dropping pearls of wisdom. She's feeling, she's giving back to the people who are following her and passing along, paying forward advice. I think she does a great job.
No.
And then last non-working person, Sasha Charnan Morrison, who probably not everybody knows, and this is a different type of personal brand. Sasha is a former fashion editor. Well, she's a fashion editor, but she is currently not working anywhere in particular. And she's extremely opinionated on all things fashion and entertainment culture. And she's fearless in the way that she gives her opinion. But what I admire about her is it's coming from a place of deep knowledge. And I think that's a really big difference. I think there are a lot of people who can mouth off on a lot of things, but she has the historical experience, education, and point of view to have a very informed opinion. So when she's being strong in her words, she has backup. So I think that if you're going to have a strong personal brand, you must make sure you actually are educated on what you're talking about.
Yes, absolutely. I love it. Those are 3 very, very good examples. Okay, tell everyone about On Brand. Obviously, it comes out April 18th, right?
Yes, so it's called On Brand, Shape Your Narrative, Share Your Vision, Shift Their Perception. Comes out April 18th. It picks up right where Leave Your Mark left off, actually, with my own case study of my rebrand, and then brings in expert contributors in their fields, whether it's, like we said, visual identity, executive presence, owning the room, social capital, whatever it may be. But throughout the book, which is different in this book than Leave Your Mark, is I do these mental gymnastics exercises. So it's actually a workbook as you go through. And the last thing I'll say about it is I really wanted to double down on the fact that this is just as much for people who are like, I'm not doing social media, it's not for me, to the people who are like, I want to build a social presence. Yeah. So both routes are relevant, and any which way you slice it, you're making an impression. So you may as well make a good one.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, you talked about social capital. We actually had Jean Chatsky on, who I'm sure you know, and she did a survey about what the most quote unquote successful people had. And one of the traits was social capital. So like, this is just proof to me that, to your point, whether you want to do social media or not, everyone needs this book. Go through the mental gymnastics worksheets and really come up and ask yourself those hard questions, but like, know the answers to these things because they matter. So we'll put the links to the 3 people you mentioned, also their Instagrams in the show notes, obviously yours, and a link to On Brand also in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thank you, Lauren. It's great to see you. I really appreciate it.